welcome everyone, and welcome to the first Clarington Comes Together. It's a virtual event that we have put together to have a conversation to support and talk with our Black community. It is also an opportunity for us to have important conversation about some of the challenges that our Black community faces. And tonight, with the help of our panelists, we will provide resources, support, as we dive into topics such as education, career development, mental health, and policing. Please note that tonight's session is being recorded and will be shared for those who wish to view again, or for those that did not have the opportunity to join us this evening. And it is important to acknowledge that our panel members and our partners are here to address barriers and provide support to marginalized communities through allyship and action. And we are all joining tonight in this spirit. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we come together tonight from the Municipality of Clarington, which is situated within the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas and the Chippewas of the Anishinaabeg, known today as the Williams Treaty First Nation. And our work on these lands acknowledges their resilience and their long-standing contributions to the area now known as the Municipality of Clarington. I am Rachel Kauhetukura. I am the Vice Chair of the Clarington's Diversity Advisory Committee, and I am also a member of Clarington's Anti-Black Racism Subcommittee. And together with our Clarington Public Library, we are pleased and extremely excited to host this event with our community. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over and call upon our Mayor, Adrian Foster, which has always been a very strong voice and a very strong supporter. And I want to turn it over to him so that he can formally greet you.
So Rachel, thank you. And to all of you that are supporting this event, and to everyone that is participating tonight, thank you. I would reflect that if you looked back a little bit more than a year ago, we probably would not be holding this event. We would not have had the dialogue that we've had over the past year. It's so important that we do that, and it is so important that we keep the momentum rolling. And the other piece is, the land acknowledgement statement. A year ago, we wouldn't have done that. So there is hope if we continue to educate ourselves, if we continue to have dialogue, if again, we keep that momentum going, that we can make some meaningful change that quite frankly should have happened many, many years ago. So to all of you that are helping to drive that change, thank you. It is truly appreciated.
Thank you, Adrian. As you've reminded me a few times, don't call you Mayor Foster, but call you Adrian. So thank you very much for that. And also I'd like to, I'm very happy that we're joined tonight by some very distinguished panelists, and they bring a wealth of knowledge about their specific areas. The first one that I want to call out is Alison Hector Alexander. She's the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the Region of Durham. I'm hoping you're waving.
Yes,
And then,
I am. Thank you, Rachel.
No problem. And the next person is Sophia Bishop. She's the founder of Elevated Living. Thank you. And then next is Joseph Mariano, is the Deputy Chief for Durham Region Police Services. And last but not least is Vidal Chabanes, is the Director of Strategy, Research and Organizational Performance with Durham Region Police Services. Okay. So greet our panel members. Upon registering for the event, community members also had the opportunity to ask questions of our panelists, and these questions have been shared and will be addressed in their presentation or will be addressed during the question period that we'll have as we wrap up the event. And if you have any question that you'd like to ask, please share it in the chat feature, and then we will attempt to go through as many as possible this evening. And we'll also share ways that you may connect following tonight's discussion to receive more information. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to the first speaker of this evening. And the topic is about education and career development. And that is for Allison Hector Alexander. And again, she's the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Region of Durham. Allison, please take it away. She's also an equity and inclusion specialist with over 15 years of experience. She's worked in creating policy, education and training on anti-racism, anti-oppression, allyship, and equity. And right now, she's the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the Region of Durham. Her most recent work was as the Director of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Durham College, where she had an oversight for the college diversity and inclusion services, the Ontario Access and Inclusion Program, RISE, and the Sexual Violence Mandate. She was also responsible for the first People's Indigenous Center and Orientation and Transitions programming for all new students. And in 2018, Allison co-presented at the Black Portraiture Conference at Harvard University on critical race theory, specifically anti-Black racism. And earlier in 2018, Allison led a group of colleagues to launch the Black Student Success Network on campus. And this initiative continues to provide opportunities for mentoring, networking, and support Black students and employees. In 2019, she co-chaired the first Social Justice Week at the college, which provided opportunities for students, staff, and community members to engage in relevant equity-related topics. She worked from a feminist, anti-racist, and anti-oppressive framework. Her work also included designing, developing, and facilitating skills development programs for women in transition from violence to independence. She has also worked with a wide range of clients, including youth at risk and street-involved youth, Ontario Works recipients, and new immigrants. Allison has been recognized with Champion Award from PFLAG Durham Region for her work in creating inclusive spaces. Through her work in all areas of diversity on campus, the Region of Durham, she has been recognized with the Diversity Champion Award in 2019 and also awarded with the Madiba Award. And Allison has completed a Bachelor of Arts in Adult Education and Digital Technologies and a Master of Education with a focus on anti-oppressive practices, access, and equity in higher education. And I can tell you that it is like I'm tired just reading the bio. So it's very impressive, and I'm so excited to hear from her. Please welcome Allison Hector Alexander. Allison, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's always interesting to listen to your bio, and I will shorten it next time, I promise. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today about education and career development for our entire community, but also how we navigate that for our Black community. And so I would like to start off with this quote by Marian Wright Edelman. And she says, "Education is for improving the lives of others and for leaving your community and your world better than you found it." And this is the goal of many supports that are in the community for our Black students, and many sometimes that they don't know about. So education is perhaps one of the most important ingredients to happy and successful and really constructive life. And in fact, really having access to a good education, during childhood and early adulthood makes a significant difference in your life later, just having the access to it. And I can tell you that I am one of those recipients where, my parents made a decision to uproot their entire life from back in the Caribbean and to relocate here to Canada for the sole purpose of providing access for me for a higher education. And so really, in an ideal case, education and educators inspire students and open up and expand their minds. And more importantly, a good education system really skillfully prepares, young children for life, right? And so really, why are there still disparities in our education system? And the more and more that we dig into it, we can see that many conversations that we're having today, we had them 35 years ago. In 1985, representatives from the Organization of Parents of Black Children met with the Associate Director of Education from the Toronto District School Board. And some of the things that came up was that there was a high dropout rate for Black students. There was an overrepresentation of Black students in non-academic schools. There were low expectations. There were culturally biased assessment tests that were being given to our children, and that there were a lack of Black studies and Black history within the curriculum. Now, fast forward to a recent report, and this is as recent as December, where the Civic Action Group and the Boston Consulting Group did a report or produced a report on the pervasive reality of anti-Black racism in Canada. 35 years later, going into 36, we're seeing many of the same things. Black students face assessment bias from teachers, 2 times fewer excellent ratings from teachers. Black students are disproportionately suspended. Black students are disproportionately expelled. Staff diversity gaps in terms of representation and the lack of role models at school, and that fewer Black students feel a sense of trust and belonging in school. And so we also need to look at, the graduation rates and what does that look like. We know that Black students had lower graduation rates, 64.5% compared to overall student population, which is 78.6%, and 22.8% dropped out compared to 14%. And so this is what a Black student said. She said, Black students are as capable, as competent, as creative, and as determined as all other students. The ways that Black students are constantly misjudged and mistreated by teachers and guidance counselors is an injustice to our community. As educators who seek to enrich an increasingly diverse nation, it is your duty and your responsibility to engage, to encourage, to engage, to motivate, to challenge, and to strengthen Black students like all others. When you begin to see Black students as part of your community, only then you will effectively fulfill your job as an educator. And this is what was from a study that was done by Dr. Carl James and Tanya Turner back in 2017. So W.E.B. Du Bois said, education must not simply teach work, it must teach life. And so what do we need to do as a community to teach life for our students or to our students? Our children need to feel safe in spaces that should and that were built to nourish learning. And so how do we as community, not only as parents, as community, as family, as advocates, how do we teach our children how to be their own advocates? And how do we center our voices to be advocates for our children? How do we make have our voices be heard around the training that happens in the education system, the policies that are developed? How do the policies center the Black voice and the Black experience? How do these policies reflect the Black voice and the Black experience? What does hiring look like? Is there race-based data that is being collected? Who is reflected in the curriculum? Do our children see themselves in the content that they're learning, right? We also have to make have our voices be heard so that we talk about implicit bias and we talk about, overarching bias, and we talk about the anti-Black racism that we know we have experienced and our children experience, and that we're present, and that we educate ourselves, and that we show up, and then we challenge these systems. If we don't do that, then we don't change anything. If we don't do that, then we don't push for the change that we need to happen so our children can be successful. So we need to advocate, we need to nudge, we need to disrupt, we need to disturb some of the systems so that we can start looking at the punitive ways that many times our children are dealt with because, again, of the bias that exists within our systems. And we need to advocate for a restorative practice approach. We need to advocate for an opportunity to have conversations so that people understand when they've harmed us and when we've caused harm and the root of that harm and the root of those trauma. We also need to explore the resources that are available. If I had known about a fraction of the resources that I know about today, my education experience and journey would have been very different. I remember when we first got here many years ago, I said to my dad, I said, so, okay, now that I'm here and I'm going to go to university, what am I going to study? And he said, well, I don't know. Like, I think I heard something and they said, computers are like, booming. Maybe you should try computers. I'm not a computer person. I don't know anything about, technical things. I knew I was wanting to help. But at the time, my dad said that, the money is in computers. I bombed that. A disaster. So we need community resources that understand the system, that understand how to navigate the system to help our students and to help our children. There are organizations that are already existing in our community. We have the Durham Black Educators Network, who've been doing amazing work for a number of years. Encourage students to connect with those resources. There are Black student success networks popping up at different higher ed institutions, colleges, universities. The Black North Initiative have seen a significant number of education institutions sign on to their pledge of commitment, sign on to say that they institutions will commit to having 3.5% of the student employee population and ensuring that they're Black students who are being able to secure employment while they're studying on campus. Be mentors in the community. Please be mentors to our students, to our youth who are exploring what their options are. Mentors will help guide you to your passion, to give you, a good sense of what is a typical day like, in your role. So encourage them to set up information interviews so they talk to people who look like them in the roles and the positions that they're excited about. Attend transition programs. One of the things that I did in my previous role was that when we hosted transition program to higher ed, we invite the entire family. Show up, be present, attend these things the more that you know about what the expectations are, the more that you know about what the system looks like, then the more present that you are, the more helpful you are to your student. There are tons of bridging programs that are available. Access them, talk to people, engage with as many community people that you can. Encourage your student to get involved. There are many scholarships per year that sometimes go, untouched because students don't know that they can actually apply for, that they're available. There are different funding options, scholarships, bursaries that are available. We just don't know where they are. And so we need to start doing better, and we need to start talking to each other more often, and we need to attend, those transitions program. U of T has an amazing, transitions, medical transitions program. Other institutions are having different transitions program pop up as well. So family, and by extension, community, it is our responsibility. Ryerson University facilitated an anti-Black racism campus climate in 2020. And there are a few things that came out of that campus climate survey. And I encourage you to Google that and read that if you can. But one of the main things that stood up for me was that campus safety and security needs to be prioritized to positively impact Black student belonging, with security trained in education, in equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we need spaces that are safe for our students so that they can feel validated, and that they can feel seen, and they can see the representation that they need to see the role models as well. And so moving on to careers, some of the stats that I wanted to share with you today is that we know that there's racism that exists. There's systemic racism that exists, and there's also, other ways that we see interpersonal racism show up in the workplace. And we know that racism creates barriers to employment. It impairs career progression for Black people. As of October 2020, the unemployment rate for Black Canadians was 5 points higher than the rate for Canadians who are not racialized, 11% versus 6.7%. And we know that while the impact of COVID-19 has driven up unemployment rate for all Canadians, we know that Black unemployment rate was 3.8 points higher, while the rate for non-racialized communities was up just 2.6%. So from 3.8% for the Black community, 2.6% for the larger community. And we know that is in part because many Black workers are disproportionately represented in service industries. So which really, they will be more impacted by the pandemic, by COVID-19. So we also know that what drives these higher unemployment figures is that Black people in Canada face many systemic challenges and barriers in the hiring processes. Right. We also know that, even when experience is comparable to that of non-Black candidates, that systemic biases make it more difficult for Black candidates to land positions for which they're sometimes overqualified. We also know that Black university graduates earn only 80 cents for every dollar earned by white university grads, despite having the same credentials. So what do we need to do? How do we rally around each other in the community? We need to network. We need to talk to each other. We need to network. We need to reach out on behalf of each other. We have to create positions where we can be mentors to people who are looking to get into the labor market and get into the job market. We need to seek mentors for those young adults who are, either making their way out of higher education or are just looking to get into the workforce. Help them seek mentors. Advocate for formal sponsorship programs. For those of us who are employed, advocate for some of those programs. Research the organization to see what their EDI, their equity, diversity, and inclusion philosophy is. Schedule information interviews. I cannot say that enough. Talk to people who are in the roles. Explore volunteer opportunities, placement opportunities as well. Leverage those communities' existing services that can support you, and learn everything that you can about the policies and processes that are in your organization, and participate in employee resource groups, right? We know aiming for success, I suggest to students that, aim for success and not perfection. Never give up your right to be wrong, because then you will lose the ability to learn new things and move forward with your life. And remember that fear always lurks behind perfectionism. And this is a quote by David M. Burns. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Very well said. I think for me, my takeaway is, how do we? And that is the question that we need to ask each other all the time, every time. And the reason for that is that when we are talking and dealing with some of these issues that are very complex, the tendency is system. But we collectively make up the system. So how do we collectively change that system? So thank you for that.
Yes.
Thank you very much for those wise words. Next, I want to take you to the second panelist that we have for today. And I want to introduce Sophia Bishop. She's the founder of Elevated Living, a personal effectiveness lifestyle company. It provides training, tools, and products to help individuals grow, achieve, and be their best self in their personal and professional lives. And Sophia was inspired by her grandmother's teaching. And so she founded Elevated Living, and it is grounded in her Tibetan, so think it, feel it, do it now principle, that it's what you think determines what you feel determines what you do, and the cumulative effect of what you do now defines and determines your legacy and your life. And throughout the years, Sophia has worked within the mental health and wellness sector. She's very committed to social justice and equity. She has served on frontline and advocacy roles and at policy tables. And she has done counseling programs for women that have been or are in abusive relationships, survivors of incest. And she has also elevated tea and conversations. And she's using tea as a conduit and engaging activity to allow people to share their thoughts, ideas, and opinions based on their experiences, values, and beliefs. She's also done a lot of diversity and health equity training program for health administrators, doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers. And she's committed to community care. And she's the founder, director, and volunteer for a number of nonprofit organizations and community programs, including but not exclusive to Tropicana Community Services. She's one of the founding members. There's also Let's Talk Mental Health Program and the Female Education and Economic Development. So please join me in welcoming our second panel member, Sophia Bishop.
Thank you so very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here today with everyone talking about mental health. And it's interesting in preparing for this and thinking of it's such a broad topic and where to start, what's the best thing to focus on. One of the things that I found happened right off the bat was I started to censor myself. The first thing that came to mind was, am I allowed to say this? Because it's not going to be speaking to the Black communities only. And I say Black communities deliberately because we are communities, we're not one homogenous group. But I was very mindful of saying particular things that others outside of the Black community, and hearing that, would then use that out of context or misinterpret it, and then use that information in a way that would not serve us well. And off the bat for me, that identified one of the major things that members of the Black communities, what we live with when we talk about, it's the extra, the idea of not being able to just be, but in always having to consider the other. How am I coming across? What is going to be happening to me? How will it be interpreted? What happens to my sense of self and power? We are not able to just be individuals. By and large, this is who I am, but we carry with us so much more. And so in thinking about mental health today, what I would like to do is to first and foremost have everyone who's listening start from the place of I, because it all starts with a conversation. It's about the conversation we're having with ourselves, our self-talk. It's the conversations we're having with others, and it's the conversations other people are having pertaining to who we are as well. So as we're listening today, I would like each of us to just listen and think about ourselves, where we're at on the spectrum for what we're going to be discussing in mental health, and also what we need to do to make a difference. And so I always like to start with the individual, because as was just pointed out, the individuals make up the collective. So we might not be able to take on everything and change the whole. But if we start right where we are with the decisions that we're making and our particular actions, then collectively, we will be having a great impact. So I'm going to start with the conversations I had this week we do mindfulness sessions. And in having those conversations, I'm talking about the participants I had that were Black, because it's a diverse group. But I think I'm just going to share with you things that came up in our sessions to give you an idea when we talk about mental health, what it is that people are living with on a day-to-day basis. So these are some of the topics that were discussed. A young man was asked to watch a video to see if he could identify one of the perpetrators of a crime. One of his friends was killed. And so he was asked by officers to watch a video. He watched it, and what was playing out in front of him was actually his friend being attacked. There was no warning that that was going to be happening, but this is what he was looking at in front of him. There was a woman who was a part of a support group because she was in an abusive relationship, and sharing her story, a comment from another member in that group was, well, at least it's not as bad or painful for her, because in her culture, it's not uncommon for men to be abusive, and it's not seen as big of a deal. We then went on to someone else who talked about going to the doctor and having with her child and wanting her child to get really dressed up. That way, she will not be looked down on, but will be treated with some kind of respect. So her child was actually putting on a suit to go in so that they could get the best service possible. There was someone whose brother had a heart attack at 45, someone who is a go-to person, always strong, seemed to be the picture of health, had a heart attack while running, did not want anyone to know about it because there was shame around that, because they were not going to be perceived as being as strong as they ought to be. There was someone else who went into the hospital, and it was assumed that they were on drugs, despite the fact that she mentioned being on new medication for her blood pressure. And I will share a couple more. There was a daughter who had put her hand up in the chat wanting to speak to her teacher. The assumption by the teacher was that she needed help with something, and the teacher didn't have the time right then and there to explain, so her hand was ignored. This child actually wanted to comment on something else and was a straight A student, but the assumption was that she needed help with whatever the course was, and so she couldn't be attended to right then and there. And then there was a young Black man who went out on a date, 19 years old, and he was asked how many children he has. All of these things point to microaggression, and we've been hearing a lot in the past year, as was pointed out. There are conversations we're having now, and their awareness of particular things that once upon a time outside of the Black community, not much was being said about it, or not enough. So microaggression is one of those things that for now many of us are becoming familiar with that term, which is referring to just the daily verbal and nonverbal, environmental or institutionalized insults that we will be receiving. There's slights and there's snobs, whether intended or unintended, with things that are quite derogatory and could be quite traumatic. And so when we talk about mental health, and the state of the Black community, it is important to ground it in the reality of what many Black people live with on a daily basis, much of which oftentimes becomes normalized. And I will talk a bit about that in a while. But it has become normalized for us because of the idea that, well, we just need to keep moving. We need to just go on. We can't afford the luxury of stopping to respond to each and everything because we wouldn't have time to do anything else. And I think this is depicted very well by a poem that was shared by Maya Angelou, one of my favorite people. She wrote this poem, and next month is actually Poetry Month, and I think it's quite fitting that we share this. So I'm going to play it, and then I am going to just discuss what this poem is about right after that.
That they paid for you already. To look at that condition. I wrote a poem about a woman who is a maid in New York City. She sits at the back of the bus with 2 shopping bags, black. If the bus stops abruptly, she says, ah! If it stops slowly, picks up somebody, misses somebody. I watched her for about 9 months. And I thought, if you don't know Black features, you may think that woman is laughing. She wasn't laughing. She was simply extending her lips and making a sound. I thought, oh, I see. That's that survival apparatus at work. So I wrote a poem for her. I used it with Mr. Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem, Mask, and my own poem for old Black men. This is love. When I think about myself, I almost laugh myself to death. My life has been one great big joke, a dance that's walked, a song that spoke. I laugh so hard, I nearly choke when I think about myself. 70 years in these folks' world, the child I works for calls me girl. I say, yes, ma'am, for working's sake. I'm too proud to bend and too poor to break, so I laugh until my stomach aches when I think about myself. My folks can make me split my side. I laughed so hard, I nearly died. The tales they tell sound just like lying. They grow the fruit, I eat the rind. I laugh until I start to cry when I think about myself. and my folks and the little children. But we wear the mask that grins and lies. It shades our cheeks and hides our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts, we smile and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh my God, our tears to thee from tortured souls arise. Oh, we sing, hey, baby, hey, baby, hey, baby, hey, baby. But oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet, and long the mile. Let the world think otherwise. We wear the mask. My fathers sit on benches. Their flesh count every plank. The slats leave dents of darkness deep in their withered flank, and they nod like broken candles, all waxed and burnt profound. They say, but baby, it was our submission, and that made your world go round. There in those pleated faces, I see the auction block, the chains and slavery's coffles, the whip and lash and stock. My father speak in voices that shred my fact and sound. They say, but sugar, it was our submission that made your world go round. They laughed to shield their crying. They shuffled through their dreams. They stepped and fetched a country and wrote the blues in screams. I understand their meaning. It could and did derive from living on the ledge of death. They kept my race alive by wearing the mask.
So delivered as only Maya can. I choose to share that with you because that poem encapsulates a number of things. The mask that we wear. And the reality is, for many in the Black community, this is what life is like. And it's for the full spectrum, whether we're talking about the professional, the student, whether we're talking about, male, female, there are many stressors that we live with and the decisions that we make on a daily basis in order to cope. What we need to do for our mental health, we wear a mask. And so I would like to just spend a bit of time just looking at some of the statements that we grow up with, statements that we're socialized into hearing. That is what we go to in order to get us through, and how it speaks to how we function as individuals, but also to the role of the larger system. There are many stats that were shared earlier by Allison that speaks to employment, what happens with education, et cetera. And we understand that the social determinants of our health, how well we are going to do physically and mentally, is definitely tied to our socioeconomic status. It's tied to our education, the experiences that we have at our workplace. It's all interconnected. So I'm not going to repeat the statistics that were shared earlier, but I'm going to talk about having that as a reality. You can then understand the reality of many Black people and their mental health. So when we talk about mental health, what are we saying? I want to talk in particular to our stressors and what we mean by stress. So the working definition that I'm going to use is the feeling that we experience when we feel that a situation or demand on our time or on ourselves far outreach what we're personally able to deliver, the resources that we have, and it leaves us feeling a sense of not being in control. And that is the reality for many who are not in control at their workplaces because we're not in enough places of positions of power, whether we're in school and seeing how the system responds to us, or those in positions of leadership, how they're responding to us. So what then do we do with that? How does it take its toll? So we know what the warning signs are for some, but I would like to share some of that with you for those who are listening, because oftentimes we don't recognize them. And so we need to, first of all, know and understand what we're feeling and dealing with to be able to do something about it. So the physical recognition of those stressors, whether it's the muscle tension, the headaches, the disturbances in our sleep, the rapid pulse. Sometimes we feel sick to our stomach, we're getting dizzy. Those can be signs of being stressed. When we look at our behavior, whether it's a loss of appetite or the compulsive eating, whether it's not having the patience that we need to have for day-to-day activities, whether it's a reduction in our ability to be able to be productive, that's also a sign. Emotionally, about our the anxiety, sadness that we could be feeling, moodiness. Sometimes we talk about someone being sometimes-ish. That could be a sign of stress, being withdrawn, feelings of isolation, not wanting to do what we would typically do. And also just our perception of things, where we become more vague and more forgetful about things. These are signs, and I want to quickly share that with you so that as you're listening and thinking of yourself and where you're at, you can recognize some of those stressors. We also have tools that will be shared with you at the end, so you will be able to access doing a stressor on what are the things that are stressing you out, so that you can pay attention to that, and also what is it that you need to be doing in order to respond. In the Black community, we know that oftentimes we go to seek comfort from the church. The research was just done, actually this year, it was done in Ottawa, looking at Black mental health. And we find that, yes, many of us, we will turn to the church for us to get support. However, the reality is that oftentimes people aren't really aware of or understand fully what to do with the mental health issues that are being expressed. We also come from a place where, like every other place where we're talking about stigma, there is embarrassment about admitting that there is something wrong. So as a result, we tend not to want to say it, because if we say it, how are we going to be treated? So there is a fear of actually saying that this is what's happening to me. And oftentimes when it's said, someone might say, okay, just pray, for example. And while prayer works for many in order to give them support and a sense of solace, the reality is that it would not be enough. There is also the idea of, well, I will just get through it on my own. And where does that come from? Well, for many of us, we grew up hearing statements like, what doesn't kill us make us stronger. Very true in some cases, but it also serves to diminish our capacity to respond to things. In saying that what doesn't kill us make us stronger, it can get us through, but it also, many have reported, gives them the feeling that if they should share that they're struggling or can't deal with something right now, it is going to be interpreted as a sign of weakness. So as a result, we continue to go. We're going to buck up. We're going to be strong despite dying inside, because we are not going to feel comfortable telling someone that there's something wrong with us mentally, in fear of how they're going to be responding, or our sense of being seen as lesser than. There's the whole idea, again, of not hanging your dirty laundry out in public, which feeds into the same idea because of the embarrassment that will come with that, the stigma that's attached to, well, there is something wrong. So we're not going to be sharing, again, the idea that we will keep it to ourselves. At work, there are many of us who were doing things, and the whole idea in a community that we're not able to just be ourselves. We represent an entire race. So if you're on the job, whatever it is that you're doing, should you mess up, I know Allison referred to it earlier, the right to fail. Many do not feel that we have the right to fail because we are not going to be judged just based on that mistake. We are going to be judged as an entire race, and indeed feel that if we mess this up, we're messing it up for others. There is also what we've grown up with, the idea of we've got to be twice as good to get half as far. Reality, we have lived that, yes, because very often that is what we need to do in order to just get half of the glance that we need. So what does that mean to us as individuals? It's just something that we accept, that this is how we're going to be working. This is what we're going to have to do in order to get to where we need to go. So we go into a space where we wear that mask. There are things that are happening to us in microaggressions on a daily basis. And we take that on. Where does it go? That's when we talk about the stressors that I identified and some of those signals and what it will mean for us, right? Because it has to go somewhere. There are those who explode and there are those who implode. So the idea that we wear that mask out of, we feel quite often necessity, also out of what we have just been raised to believe, the environment that we're in, what we need to do in order to cope. But there is a price that's paid for that. So I would like you to think about the mask that you're wearing and what that does. What is the price that we're paying in order to do that? And when we look at that stressor that we might feel and where we go for help, it leads us back to the larger community and what we know for a fact. We don't have enough research being done about our mental health, about the experiences that we're having in the mental health arena. The research that was done recently in Ottawa speaks to some of that, where people are talking about their interaction with service providers. There is the report that there aren't enough people that would be able to understand the needs as we are expressing them. So in other words, we need to see more Black people, more people who are able to understand the walk, the journey, so that we're able to express ourselves freely in a way that we know can be understood and not further judged, as the example that was shared with the woman who went into the support group and found herself having to teach not only the people in the support group, but also the facilitators about her particular community. She had to be dealing with the racism. So we know that when we look at the mental health institutions as they're currently existing, yes, we have funds that's being put in to increase the numbers, but we really do still have a far way to go. And it's not just about accessing the system, it's about the experience that we have when we have experienced that system. We know that many in the community get the help that they need or are identified via the criminal justice system, an area that does not get nearly as much attention as it needs to be receiving. But that is when many of us are getting the particular help. That's when many of us are being identified. And I know that we are familiar with, unfortunately, some of the responses that have taken place when we are taken into the criminal justice system, or when people do not understand our realities, and when that's mixed with racism, that the end result for the Black community is not a very good one. So we need to look at the systemic pieces as well as to how, once Black people are entering the system, dealing with mental health, what does that response look like? What does it feel like to them? Is it further exacerbating the problem that they had in the first place, why they had to go? Are they receiving equitable treatment, or are they ending up in a place where they're feeling even more stressed than they were before? So we know that we need to start looking at the data that has to be collected. We know that we need to start looking at the experiences that people are having, Black people are having in the system, to understand what needs to be put in place for those particular responses so that it can be effective for them. So I am going to say for a minute, in speaking with those who are not a part of the Black community, to ask this one thing: what is the role that you are playing in making sure that the members of the Black community are being treated equitably? I call it the right way: respect, integrity, transparency, and equity. What are the things that are being put in place deliberately, not passively, but deliberately, to ensure that the experiences that those who are in your organizations, those who are sitting with you at work, are experiencing fair and respectful treatment? What are the policies that are being put in place to ensure that they are being treated with the respect that they deserve? And also in looking at the conversations that we're having, who are the conversations being held with? Who is missing from that table that should be at that table to inform the conversation, to inform the policies that are going to be put in place? And I would like to lastly talk about the self-care to our communities, Black members of our community, to talk about the self-care, because at the end of the day, as I said, the individuals make up the collective, and we need to be well. So what are the things that we need to be doing in order to take care of our mental health? Please feel free to do the assessment around what the stressors are, but I will speak to mindfulness, the idea of practicing paying attention in the present, our breathing, not looking back, not looking forward, but just here and now, to be able to more than cope, but to be well in the moment, to deal with whatever our stressors are, to be able to function at a level that serves us well. So when we talk about self-care, mindfulness is a key piece I would like us to be practicing. The other part of this is committing, the C part, committing to the self-care that we need in order to make sure that we're okay, and to assert ourselves and our right to be who we are unapologetically. And here I am speaking about the right to be ourselves, not representing an entire community, not representing an entire race, but to be who we truly are and to define that for ourselves. And the idea that yes, we are not just the color of our skin any more than we are just our gender or socioeconomic status. We are many things, and we have the right to have all of those things define and reflect who we are. The next part of this, I will say, when we talk about the A in care, is basically looking at what it is that we're accepting and the idea that we assert ourselves in our right to be who we are. And that comes with risk, yes, but it's the risk that's worth taking. So we're not going to implode. We have the right to assert ourselves at tables that we're sitting at tables where we don't see ourselves reflected, to say this is what we need to have happen. So we are going to speak up unapologetically about what we feel we need. The next thing, the R, is request. To request, excuse me, what we want and deserve. Not to be afraid, because oftentimes we feel we're being silenced, or we silence ourselves just to get by, not to rock the boat, because this is what we need to do at this moment for our own survival. But we have the right to request what we deserve to have and to advocate on our own behalf. And I will say in the next part of it, when we talk about the E, it's a conversation, elevating the conversation. We have the right to expect the best. We have the right to elevate the conversations so that we're able to address the things that we feel aren't being addressed right now in the way that they need to be addressed. So we are going to talk about those things that we see going wrong, but nobody wants to say.
Thank you, Sophia. It's a very powerful segment that you've done, and you've provided a lot for us to think about. I think what resonated for me is the weight that we carry, and the fact also that, in a way, sometimes the victim has to become the educator of the perpetrator. And that is a very hard space to be in. And I really love the care and how you broke it down. So thank you so much for that, Sophia. And I think, as you were speaking also and talking about the policing, I think that's the next segue into our next panel members. And so I'd like to introduce them. So we have the Deputy Chief, Joe Mariano, is currently the officer in charge of policing operations within Durham Regional Police Services. And he's had a very diverse career as a frontline officer and also as a member of the Service Technical Support Unit. And throughout his career, he's experienced administrative assignments in policy development and planning, investigative assignments in the Criminal Investigation Bureau, and also various inspector roles, and as part of the communication 911 units, patrol operation, and others. Joe has attended the University of Western Ontario, where he's earned a Bachelor of Arts in Economics, and continued with a Master in Business Administration at Queen's University. Joe is noted for leading the successful transition of a multi-agency public safety radio system, building the system from the ground up. And this is a system that currently serves over 3,400 users consisting of police, municipal services, region of Durham, Ontario Tech University, Durham College Security and OPG, and some emergency services. And Joe's also been very involved in the community with a number of boards and associations. And the second panel member, and they're going to tag team this for us, is Dr. Vidal Chavanes, is currently the Director of Strategy Research and Organizational Performance within Durham Regional Police Services. And he has more than 15 years experience in education and training in Canada, in the US and the UK. And that includes secondary and post-secondary, technical, vocational, also as well, and training programs. He holds a doctorate in education from the University of Calgary, and he's worked full-time and in a consulting capacity with public, private, and nonprofit organizations, all within the realm of training and education. And through this engagement, he has written and articulated agreements, managed faculty and staff, and charted some strategic direction on for different organizations in North America and internationally. And is also currently a postdoctoral research fellow with the University of Toronto, where he's working on a national research study focused on Black student university access, and is also an associate member of the Yeats School of Graduate Studies at Ryerson University, and where he's supervising a PhD candidate for the Raymond Chang School of Continuing Education. So please please join me in welcoming Joe and Vidal. Joe, Vidal, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. I'll start off. I would like to thank the Clarington Comes Together organizers for the opportunity to be a panelist this evening, to give an opportunity to Durham Regional Police to give some insight into the services that we provide with a focus on mental health response and diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is my privilege to present this evening with such an esteemed group of panelists. It's also my privilege to represent the Durham Regional Police Service and our command team with Dr. Vidal Chavanes. I've been asked to focus on an overview of the Durham Regional Police Service and our operating context in order to give a greater understanding of how we provide police services to our region and Clarington specifically. The Durham Regional Police Service has a committed staff of over 1,200 members, both sworn and civilian. The Patrol Operations Section has 5 police divisions that service each of our 8 municipalities within the region of Durham. 16 Division itself provides police service to Clarington and is led by Inspector Jeff Haskins. The Durham Regional Police Service is guided under the Police Services Act legislation that assigns a Police Services Board to oversee the governance of our service. So what I'm going to do this evening, I'm going to start at the legislative governance level, and then I'll drive down into the operational level, and Dr. Chavanes will get into much more detail in terms of some of our specific programs in terms of mental health, equity, and inclusion. The Police Services Board consists of 3 regional council members, 3 members appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council, and 1 community member who is appointed by resolution through the regional council itself. In addition to legislative planning that the Police Services Board undertakes, it has engaged the residents of our region to develop its action plan to enhance trust and confidence in the Durham Regional Police Service. This plan is scheduled to be completed the second quarter of 2021. So under legislation, the Police Services Board is required to establish and develop a business plan and also an equity inclusion plan. In addition to that, the board is listening to our community to specifically develop their action plan to enhance trust and confidence. Under the authority of the Police Services Act, the Police Services Board is required to develop its business plan. The business plan itself details the priorities, objectives, and strategies that guide the delivery of police services in Durham Region. As I stated, in addition, we also develop an equity and inclusion strategic plan that is a pathway towards a more equitable, inclusive, and effective police service. Understanding the importance of working with and meeting the needs of all of our communities we serve, the Durham Regional Police maintains a centralized equity and inclusion unit. This unit is led by Dr. Chaban and drives the priority commitments within the 2020 to 2022 equity inclusion strategic plan. I'll have Dr. Chaban go into more detail with respect to that plan, but it's important to note that the plan itself, the equity inclusion plan, and our business plan drive what we call our community safety plans. Each division has a specific community safety plan at the local community level, and it supports our common business plan goals. These community-specific plans provide divisional leadership with the ability to address the unique needs and challenges of the communities that we serve. Each divisional community safety plan is developed by the divisional leadership team that includes the divisional inspector, patrol services leader, platoon staff sergeants, and the community response unit. Recently, in partnership with our local municipalities, we have initiated community safety advisory councils to assist in the development and review of our community safety plans. The Clarington Community Advisory Council is set to be established by the third quarter of this year. Specifically in Clarington, I'd like to highlight a number of initiatives that we have undertaken to support community safety and in support of equity inclusion through Inspector Jeff Haskins. We have a community constable program in East Division, 16 Division, established to focus on actively supporting the patrol efforts to prevent and reduce criminal activity and build positive relationships. Community constables enhance the work of the general duty constables. And I'd like to introduce Constable Sarah Foote, who's not here this evening, but as our first community constable assigned to the municipality of Clarington. We also have our foot patrol that focuses on the downtown areas of Bowmanville, Newcastle, and Orono. And most notably, our migrant worker support program. East Division continues to support the seasonal migrant workers in our region. In 2020, East Division collected several boxes worth of food and clothing to assist in showing our support for our seasonal residents. The 2020 agricultural season was impacted by the global pandemic and added another dimension to the challenges faced by migrant workers in our community. The migrant worker program was developed in an effort to engage with this underrepresented group of residents in Durham region. As a continuing aspect of this project, East Division connected with employers, government agencies, and the Migrant Worker Association to provide the appropriate support in relation to worker issues. East Division continues to enhance this program and collaborate with the workers and the employers in our efforts to sustain a safe community and specifically attend to any concerns within this community that is typically, as it states, seasonal, but regardless of the seasonality, no less important than any other resident in our community. I'd like to turn it over now to Dr. Chaban.
Thanks, Deputy. So my name is Vidal. Good evening. I also want to thank the individuals who invited me to be here. I'm looking forward to having some questions from the folks that are on the line as well. So I will not be long. I do want to say that I come to you from Whitby, Ontario, which is the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island. I think it's important, to Ms. Bishop's point, that we take off the masks that we're wearing, in the vein of recognizing the land that we're on. As we talk about truth and reconciliation in this country, there can be no reconciliation without truth. And so let's talk about what brought us here tonight. We all witnessed a murder that took place on TV at the end of 2020, and it shone a light on some of our institutions and our systems in North America, around the world, and their foundations in anti-Blackness. This was and is particularly acute for policing. So in response, too late, of course, but in response, the Durham Regional Police have drafted 4 initiatives. We want to be able to use this moment to create change that will become part of the way that we do business. So it becomes part of the system. We recognize that the change needs to be systemic. So when the deputy and I are long gone from this organization, there's a system in place to root out disproportionality and disparity based on race, so that in 10 years, we're not having this conversation again. And if we are having it again, we're not saying that we just don't have the information to inform it. So the 4 initiatives that DRPS decided to move forward with in response to the context that we find ourselves in, first and foremost, surrounds the collection of race-based data for all police public interactions. At the moment, we're mandated to collect that data with respect to use of force. We're mandated by the ministry. Use of force interactions represent about 0.04% of all police public interactions in Durham. There are a tremendous amount of areas in which we need to collect this information. And so we're moving forward in that regard. We'll be establishing a community roundtable. We're guided by our diversity advisory committee, but we will have one specific to race-based data collection and move forward with that project as an organization. The second thing that we've done is to invite community participants into our recruit interviews for the first time, and to my knowledge, for the first time in the province. Thus far, we've had 6 members of our diversity advisory committee participate in recruit interviews. What we wanted to do was open up the doors and be very clear and transparent about what we look for, what we ask, the process of identifying new recruits to the service. We also have a community panel that's reviewing all of our policies and procedures and internal directives so that they can bring a lens that we may not have at the organization. The third thing that we're moving forward with is a commitment to an annual equity-related training focused on anti-Black racism, anti-racism, as well as bystander intervention. Our Police Education and Information Innovation Center will be leading that particular program, and that is slated to begin in 2021. And then lastly, so that we can look internally as well to root out any areas of disproportionality or disparity in the organization, we'll be launching a demographic census that's overlaid over our member survey so that we can identify the ways that individuals' different identities impact them at work at DRPS. And we can identify whether or not, based on those identities, individuals are not provided opportunities or are not provided the ability to move up through the organization. So we'll be moving ahead with that as well. And those 4 initiatives have all been endorsed by our executive leadership team, and the communication of which is beginning and will be cascaded throughout the organization and throughout the community. I'll likely just leave it there so that there's time for some questions, but I'm looking forward. I thank all the rest of the panelists and looking forward to the conversation. But I could keep talking if you'd like.
No, thank you, Vidal. Thank you, Joe. It was great. And thank you especially for, some of the actions that are being taken at Durham Region Police Services. I think that we are in a place right now where people want to see action. And I think by you leading the charge on that, and especially in the police space, I think that will really, really push and help in changing some of the ingrained issues that we've seen in the system, right? So thank you for all of that. At this point, I believe that I want to turn it over. We are entering the question and answer portion, and I will turn it over to Angela. But before I do that, I want to thank you all for making the time to come here and share from your respective perspectives on, what is going on in the community, what is being done to address some of the systemic issues related to racism and specifically anti-Black racism. So thank you all for doing that. Angela, I'll turn it over to you to do the question and answer period. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Rachel. I was looking in the question and answer period. I don't see, it's a quiet audience that we have. I didn't see any questions coming directly, but I have a question also here for Vidal. As you spoke about the 4 initiatives that you are working on, or the region is working on to bring forward, is there a particular way that the community itself can get involved into the recruitment? That's point number 2 that you brought. And how would they go about get reaching out to you?
So you're talking about community participation in the recruit interviews?
Right.
Absolutely. I will just let everybody know that in order to participate in that, there is a background process that has to be gone through, just so that's clear. So if you are interested, you can certainly put your name forward. What I can do is provide my email address to the organizers of the event, and that can be shared with members that have joined us tonight. You can email me, you can email our equity and inclusion unit directly as well. I believe it's equity and inclusion at drps.ca, but I will provide my email address and all the other email addresses that you can use to be in touch if you are interested in putting your name forward to participate on those panels.
Okay, thank you. There's a question coming in, but while I'm waiting on it to come in, this question is for Joseph. I just wanted to know, I know you spoke about the overall structure of the police, the DRPS, the overall structure of it. I wanted to know, is there a plan to work, or do you have specific target for the demographics? Do you work towards the demographics within the community? Is there like a liaison, like, you have the Black community? Is there someone that they can reach out to, or is it just an overall structure that you have that that goes for the community, or does the DRPS works accordingly to the demographics that they're dealing with in the community?
What I can say is that within each of our communities, we have analysts that we work with. So the analysts we work with focus on a number of areas, not only within our community safety plan and our activities there to ensure that we're reaching our goals and objectives, but also with respect to ongoing and evolving community safety issues, whether it be traffic, whether it be break and enters, any other types of criminal behavior, or any other types of concerns that may be within the communities themselves. But specifically to areas for specific demographics, no. Our equity and inclusion plan, I'll turn it over to Dr. Chauvin. Our equity and inclusion unit has a broader strategy for the region, and we localize that strategy within the community safety plans for each of the divisions. So we take the broad goals and objectives within the equity inclusion plan, and we give it local attention through the inspectors. So that's how we get from the regional police service governance piece to the local piece in terms of how we address various types of calls for service. And the equity inclusion piece, I'll turn over to Dr. Chauvin for more details.
Thanks, Deputy. So if I understand the question correctly, what I can say is part of our equity and inclusion plan is to ensure that our leadership reflects the region and that our membership reflects the region. So we have some targeted recruitment campaigns in order to make that happen. We are far away from that at the moment. And I do want to say, because I didn't mention before, that there are a number of ways, if the community is interested in participating in some of the initiatives at the service. So in addition to those panels that I mentioned before, becoming part of the Race-Based Data Steering Committee, there's also an opportunity to join the Diversity Advisory Committee regionally. There's also an opportunity to join the diversity advisory committees that exist at all of the divisions. So there is one for 16 as well for East Division, where we are right now. And there's also a youth and policing program for youth in the community to participate, as well as a youth advisory committee, which is coming, that will provide an opportunity for youth between the ages of 16 to 24 to provide some input as well, and to help build some bridges with police. I hope I answered your question. If you want to clarify, please do.
Okay, thank you. I have a question here that it says, Is there anything that the region or our neighbors are doing that Clarington should consider doing? I know I've been in a few discussions, and I know like Ajax Pickering and that I've been doing, and in Whitby, like within the DRPS. Is there something that they have been doing that Clarington maybe hasn't been doing that we should do out here that would draw more of a community involvement, so there's not so much of a disconnect, I guess?
It's probably a tough question for myself or the deputy to answer. I think that we can connect with the local inspector and some of the local members to find out if there's anything that's happening regionally that Clarington's not a part of, and certainly get back to you on that for sure. And there is a question in the chat about training and education. I don't know if you're seeing it, Angela.
I'm trying. Yeah, I have this one question. This question is for Joe. It says, I think maybe that's the one you've seen also. And it says, what are your thoughts on the incorporation of crisis intervention training as part of mandatory police training? That's the first part. Secondly, where are the measures been put in place to improve the relationship with the Black community to change the officer perception? We identify there is inherent systematic bias, so we top-down approach to educating senior leaders is very important. Joe?
Okay, thank you. A couple parts there. So I'll focus on the first part, and Dr. Chaban, who was overseeing our Education and Innovation Center, can support any additional comments he may have. And then the second piece, I'll turn over to Dr. Chaban. It's his area of expertise. With respect to crisis intervention training, obviously mental health and mental health support within our region is something that's is an ongoing concern for us. So having said that, under our community safety unit, the Durham Regional Police has a mental support unit that consists of currently 2 teams comprised of a police constable partnered with a registered nurse from Lakewood Health. That's been an ongoing partnership, and that partnership will be growing and expanded to 5 constables and 5 nurses that will provide 7-day-a-week coverage. So we're very excited about that. So in terms of training, we have officers that are specifically trained and working with a nurse in the field, and the coverage is expanding to 7 days a week to support people in crisis. Specifically training, what does it look like? We have mental health response officer training that consists of 4 days of mental health support training, and we have 288 sworn officers that have completed that training. Our annual use of force requalification training includes de-escalation training, and we have mandatory scenario-based mental health and de-escalation training separate from that. That's an e-learning component that all of our members, our officers must complete. The Durham Regional Police also has a partnership with the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada that brings mental health professionals, advocacy groups, people living with mental illness, police, and university researchers together to investigate frameworks for education and training methods for police designed to enhance interaction between police and people with mental illness. And finally, all of our new recruits are part of this study and receive this training that consists of police, clinicians, and mental health experts. So our training itself is fairly widespread and diverse. It incorporates our frontline officers right from police college, ongoing training through annual use of force, and then our specialized training for officers on the front line, and then our specialized units. So we try to have a complete package of resources available to respond to not only people in crisis, but people that need mental health support. I'll also say that we have our Durham Connect table. It's a community-based program that refers people that have various needs to what we call the situation table. It's a risk-based assessment table where we have social workers, CAS, representatives from education and such. So we can determine, okay, who's the best group of people or individuals to deal with people that require support in our communities, from mental health to housing to whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of commitment on our part to ensure that we provide that support. And also the region itself, through the Police Services Act, is in the process of developing a community safety and well-being plan that we're actively involved in developing with the region itself. So a lot of activities, not only ongoing, but in the process of being developed. I'll turn over to Dr. Chaban. Thank you.
Sure. So in terms of the second part of the question, I'm going to break it up into two because they are fairly distinct. So in terms of officer perception, all of the members have undertaken fair and impartial police training over the last 3 or 4 years. I believe it predates me coming to the service, but it was something that started in Toronto that all of the services in Ontario picked up, and we ensured that we were 100% compliant. All of our members have taken fair and impartial police training. And as indicated, we're incorporating a regular and annual equity-related training for all of our members, which will include anti-Black racism, anti-racism, as well as bystander intervention. The conversation around systemic bias, however, is a different one. You can be the most unracist person in the world. If you work in a system that is biased, then we will get biased results. And so with respect to some of the systemic approaches that we're taking, what I mentioned earlier, I think is going to be very key. And again, it's late, but all the police services have been late in the game in this regard in Canada. And that is the collection of race-based data in our interactions with the public to be able to identify where there are areas of disproportionality or disparity, and then ask some very important questions internally about why that might be the case. It seems like a cop-out to say we actually don't know, but we actually don't know about, we don't know the details on whether or not there is indeed disparity in the ways that our officers interact with individuals who are racialized. And so it's going to be important for us, outside of the anecdotal data that we have, outside of what may be some video clips that move around on social media. We don't have the numerical statistics to be able to point to whether or not that proliferates throughout our interactions with the public. And so it's important for us to collect that data, be able to piece together in its analysis the story that it tells about our interactions with different communities throughout the region.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take just a little shift just from the policing question. And I see that we have one here for Allison. And Allison, the question is, what plan does your Durham Region Equity and Diversity and Inclusion team have in working with local municipal committees?
Okay, thank you for that question. And so for now, the team is I, but we're in the process of building that. This is week 2 for me on the job, but it is very important. And one of my priorities is to work very closely with the municipalities, with the different diversity, equity, and inclusion teams participating on the panel this evening, building relationships, looking at how we share resources, how we collaborate, how we develop some mutual respectful partnerships as well. It's important that there's that ongoing conversation so that some of the local issues that are coming to the municipalities, we can look at how we approach what these concerns are, what the accountability is, what the solutions are, how we can plan together so that we're not, one hand over here doing one thing and the other here doing one thing and having duplicated efforts. And so how can we leverage the resources that we have? How can we build capacity in our communities? How can we look at the resources, the education that we can do and collaborate for that to happen? And so, it doesn't, in my mind, collaboration is always, the way to go. Collaboration makes sense. Collaboration ensures that we can do more for our community. So I have every intention of working closely, of ongoing communication, of attending meetings, and really just engaging, with those folks who work much closer with the community, so that we're operating from a place that there's consistency. As I said, that we're not duplicating efforts, we're not stepping on toes, and that we're not reinventing the wheel. So the whole idea is, how do we leverage the partnerships, the relationships, the collaborations, so that we can better support the community?
Thank you. Before I let you go, there's a question someone has put in with respect. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with what the Peel School Board and inquiring to the Peel School Board, what they're doing right now with respect to diversity. They wanted to know whether or not this is something that we're going to be considering here in Durham. So I'm not sure if you're aware what.
I don't know the present specifics. I know there was quite a bit that was happening last year. And I think that these are things that we have to look at individual board levels in terms of what is, what are the concerns, and what are some of the resources, what are some of the programs that are in place, to support the different communities. So I am not a huge proponent of blankets approach or blankets, we're just, this works here, so let's just do it. We're individual communities, and as Sophia mentioned, even within our Black community, we have intersections within those communities, right? And so I'm not a huge proponent of one size fits all. I think it's important that we look at who are community members, what are the concerns that have been presented, what are the needs of those students within those spaces, and how do we best respond to it, and how do we enhance on what already exists, so that it reaches more and that people are more aware of what the resources are. But I think it's important that we continue to apply a lens to see what is working and what isn't working. And if something isn't working in terms of status quo, then we have every responsibility as a community to address it, to shift it, and to disrupt it, and to look at what is needed. How are we being responsive to our community? That is my approach.
Sorry, Allison, that was my question. And just to provide clarification, the Appeals Code Board, basically where the Ministry of Education was mandated to basically take over and look at some of the practices, because there's been numerous complaints.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is looking at the common elements that are valid across school boards, because we see that trend in different school boards repeated in education, especially for Black children, and so it's looking at is this a tool later on, maybe not at the level of an inquiry, but a tool that can be used to look at how a school board is actually structuring themselves to be more inclusive. So that was the premise for my question.
And this is where I encourage parents to get involved, right? I encourage parents to ask questions, to start reading, and even when we're not sure, have conversations with other parents so that we can start to advocate and that we can start to drive some change. And this is an opportunity that we have right now in this present moment, that we don't know how long this opportunity is going to last. We don't know how long the attention, and I say attention on anti-Black racism, is going to last. So we have an opportune time for parents to get involved and to question how the board does things. We've been told that streamlining, has been, completely taken away. Has it? We know that bias exists. We all have our own biases. We know that there's implicit bias. We know that there's very specific bias towards Black students in the system. We know that students have been directed towards particular programs because educators don't think that they can be successful in higher performing programs, right? As a parent, when your son comes home or your daughter or your child comes home and says, I really wanted to do engineering, but I was told I should do this. Oh, who told you should do this, right? You go back and you challenge, ask questions, push back. Because I think if you start there, maybe we don't have to get to an inquiry. Maybe the powers that be, the leadership, that they're listening. And as I said, there's no better time than this point right now to jump on the opportunity to say, this is not working for our children. Here is what we're demanding from our systems.
Thank you.
I hope that answers the question, Rachel.
I will reach out and then we can have a longer chat.
Yes, absolutely.
I just have, I know time is of the essence. So I have one more question, but I think when it's going out to either Vidal or Joe, I think someone wanted to know how will information about youth in policing and the Youth Advisory Committee be communicated to youth? Is that something that can be sent out to the high school principals in the region?
Yeah, I can take that one. The communication has started. It is also available on the website, drps.ca. We put it out on all our social media as well. And it has been communicated to the school boards, but we can double up on that as well so that it's widely available for individuals. I know that it is often oversubscribed in terms of applicants to the number of positions we have. So it does make its way around, but we're very, very interested in ensuring that it makes its way to communities that are often marginalized. And the actual demographics of YIP are far more representative of our communities in Durham region than the membership at this point, DRPS.
Thank you. I think we have a few more questions, but I think at this point, what we will do is that any questions that we haven't answered here, we will follow up after the event. I will go back over now to Rachel.
Okay.
Thank you, Bilal.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, everyone. What I want to do at this point is thank everyone on behalf of the Municipality of Clarington, on behalf of the Clarington Diversity Advisory Committee, the Anti-Black Subcommittee, and also the Clarington Public Library. I want to thank our members of the community, our panel members for joining us today, and we hope to be able to continue the discussion and to keep communication open. I think that this is very helpful. This is very needed in the community. And I cannot close by saying thank you, Angela, for your leadership on this. Thank you also to Clarington Library for being such a great support to facilitate and to set this up for us. I also want to thank my co-chair that is on the line today, and that is Mira McDonald. Mira, if you are here, can you say hi?
Oh,
Thank you. And also, last but not least, I do want to thank Erica. She's the one that keeps us together, let's just say. And so thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Vidal. And thank you, Allison. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your devotion to this work. And also thank you, Mayor Foster, because you have been such a great support to the Diversity Committee. And so we want to thank you for your contribution and your support. And I want to wish you all a very good evening. I think that we will be in touch one way or another to continue the conversation. And want to wish you a happy Easter if you're celebrating as well as we're going into Easter weekend.